Well, welcome again, and Shabbat Shalom almost. Another hour and a half, it'll be Shabbat. But anyway, welcome to Facebook people and YouTube people. I know you didn't get to hear the music, but these songs show what we're going to talk about tonight and why Paul, who was Saul of Tarsus, said the things we're going to hear that he said. And I should say, Saul did not change his name to Paul. He always had two names. He was Saul of Tarsus. Shaul was his Hebrew name. His Roman name was Paulus. Everybody had two names in those days. Many Jews today still have two names. They have a Hebrew name and a regular name. I think we're going to turn the volume down a little bit. Doesn't that sound kind of weird? A little bit weird? No? All right. Borderline weird. But we always have to go back to, and those of you that come to all my stuff know what I'm going to say. Paul, Saul/Paul, but we'll call him Paul to make it easier. You know, Joan always tells me if you use people's Hebrew names, and if you call Paul Shaul, and if you call Isaiah Yeshayahu, and if you call, then nobody knows who you're talking about. But we have to go back to Paul's history. From the time of his bar mitzvah at age 12 or 13, he was in the temple studying. He studied under Gamaliel, it tells us in the book of Acts, who was the premier rabbi of the time. He was a Pharisee of Pharisees. He was a Hebrew of Hebrews. No one, he doesn't say I was in the top 10%. He says no one was more zealous for the traditions of the fathers than I was. Nobody was advancing more in Judaism than I was. I was at the top of the class. And in Philippians 3, he tells us, all that stuff now I count as loss compared to knowing Christ. I count it as rubbish. And the Hebrew or the Greek word there means manure. It's skavula, it's manure. But you don't want to write manure in the Bible, so we say rubbish. So he has this transition of being Pharisee of Pharisees to being the apostle of grace, the apostle to the Gentiles. When he was a Pharisee, he wouldn't have talked to a Gentile. He would have stepped away as a Gentile walked by. He wouldn't have come in contact with anything Gentile. Like I like to tell you, but Bill doesn't know all my stories. When I was arguing with this ultra-Orthodox rabbi at the Western Wall and he started punching me in the chest, I said, oh, you just defiled yourself. You touched a Gentile. that got him even madder. But anyway, so he goes from being the most zealous for the law to preaching the gospel to Gentiles. And when Ananias goes to the street called Straight in Damascus to heal him, the Lord says to him, you're going to go there, you're going to heal him, and you're going to tell him all the things you're going to have to suffer for my name. He's my chosen vessel to the Gentiles, is repeated several times through Acts. He's my chosen vessel to the Gentiles. Ananias says, Lord, I don't know if you're aware of this, but this guy's bad news. This guy's very dangerous. He's rounding people up. Just go there. And I love that passage in Acts 9 where he walks in and calls him Brother Saul. That is so cool. And baptizes him. Like I said yesterday morning at the study, Ananias goes the rest of his life saying, I baptized Paul. I baptized Paul. Wow. Have you baptized anybody famous? No. So he goes, and we're going to take one passage from 1 Corinthians. What a great story. The church at Corinth was a mess, but there were so many awesome things that happened there. Paul spends a year and a half there. There's a big synagogue, a big group of Jewish believers. There's a huge temple to Apollo. Many believers come out of there. So you have this mixed church, and they're meeting at the Gentile guy's house, and the head of the synagogue becomes a believer. And can you imagine how exciting that would have been? And there's still people going in and out of the temple to Apollo. And that's why the church was so complicated, and Paul had to write them 2 letters. And the joke going around on Facebook was, if Paul sees the church in America, he's going to have to write a letter. Oh, come on, that's a little bit funny. So in 1 Corinthians, he talks about preaching. At the beginning he says, I don't know anything except Christ and Christ crucified. I don't talk about anything except Christ and Christ crucified. All I want to know is Christ and Christ crucified. A long way from being Pharisee of Pharisees. The suffering Messiah that they had read about, not just in Isaiah 52, 53, but other places, that the rabbis didn't understand because they didn't want a suffering Messiah. They wanted a powerful Messiah. They wanted to get rid of Gentiles. They wanted to have a powerful kingdom again, like the time of David and Solomon. They weren't ready for a lamb. They wanted a lion. That's another kind of a funny line, but not really funny. The Jews were waiting for a lion and they got a lamb. Now the church is waiting for a lamb and they're going to get a lion. Because when he comes back, he's not going to be a lamb. But he says, I only want to know Christ and Christ crucified. So, he walked into Panera's in the morning and he'd say, hey, I want to tell you guys about Christ and Christ crucified. They'd say, well, no, we're talking about the Indians game. He'd say, well, I don't care. I'm going to tell you about Christ and Christ crucified. Get out of here, you weirdo. That's all he wanted to know. And we say, yeah, but hey, what about my cholesterol? Hey, what about my sore toe? And hey, what about my car? And what about, we're so pathetic. But anyway, so 1 Corinthians 9:16, for if I preach the gospel, I have nothing to boast of. For necessity is laid upon me, yes, woe is me if I do not preach the gospel. Now, first of all, let's clarify one thing. Nobody today knows what the gospel even is. It's been hijacked. It's gone from being Christ-centered to being man-centered. It's all about social justice and good works, and let's all just be nice. And those things are important. They come from the gospel, but they're not the gospel. They're not good news. You can do good works all your life, and if you don't know what happened here, you're still going to die in your sins. But the modern church doesn't care about blood and crosses. And like I always emphasize, when you study Torah, then you can understand Yeshua. Then you can understand what Jesus did. Then you can understand why he had to come and why he had to die the way he did. And why that was the only way for us to get into the kingdom. And Paul talks about this over and over again. You read, I don't want to go on a tangent, but if you read Ephesians chapter 1, he keeps talking about we've been redeemed by his blood. We've been redeemed by his blood. Peter says, we haven't been bought with gold and silver. We've been bought by his blood. And people go, yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, I know all that. I know all that stuff. But you don't understand. I have 8 doctor appointments tomorrow. My car broke down. My cable's out. You don't understand how hard my life is. Well, he says, I have nothing to boast. In other places he says, it's not me who lives. The old me was crucified with the Messiah. The old me died. It's Christ who lives in me. The old me doesn't live anymore. He always talks about the flesh and the spirit, how you have to live in the spirit and not in the flesh. So he says, if I preach the gospel, I don't go around boasting. Yep. He wasn't like those guys on Christian TV. Yep, here I am. And if you get me a private jet, I'll preach the gospel even better. Because then I can get to wherever I need to go. I don't want to rely on airlines and stuff. No, he said there's no boasting. He had his work to do as an apostle. An apostle. Apostolos, the sent ones. The sent ones. This was his work. It wasn't a choice. We're going to get to the Old Testament counterpart of this in a little bit. But it wasn't a choice. Jesus didn't say to him, well, Paul, here's the story. You can go out and preach the gospel, or if you'd like more of an administrative job, you can be administrative assistant to Timothy over there in Ephesus, or you can go to Rome and, do all of Peter's emails and stuff. No, he doesn't have a choice. He has to preach the gospel. In chapter 1, he says, I wasn't sent to baptize. I was sent to preach the gospel. I think this is a funny little passage. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but he says, oh, I wasn't sent to baptize. He goes, I baptized a couple of guys, and, oh, wait a minute, I baptized Stephanus's whole family. And if I baptized anybody else, I don't remember. To him, that's not why he came. He came to preach the gospel. And so what was important to him is he had people who were under the law. Remember, at this time, the church is predominantly Jewish. So he had people under the law who he says are in bondage to the law. And he had pagans who 2 weeks ago were worshiping Apollo, going to temple prostitutes, sacrificing to gods, eating the sacrifices, doing all this pagan stuff, kind of like the Olympics were. The Olympics went totally over to paganism. And I don't want to get into talking about that, but I recommend you watch a video by Jonathan Cahn about the opening ceremonies. It's just unbelievable. But he says, he has this mixed bag of people that he has to deal with. And he says it's a necessity that's laid on me. It's a duty. I'm compelled to preach the gospel. He wasn't preaching, oh, y'all be nice to everybody. And, you guys over there, stop arguing. And, don't raise your voice. Because after all, that one verse in Acts yesterday morning was funny. The guy hits him in the mouth and he says, where are you, white wall? And he yells at the guy in Acts 22, I think, or 21 or 22. But anyway, so he says, I have to preach because that's what he wants me to do. Why? Because I'm a doulos. Almost every letter he says I'm a doulos. I'm a bond servant. What was a bond servant? Somebody who couldn't pay their debt. You borrowed $5,000 from somebody. Payments due at the end of the month. You don't have $5,000. So you went and worked for the guy till you did $5,000 worth of work. You weren't a slave, but you weren't getting paid. You were an indentured servant. We have them in American history in colonial days. And then once the amount of work was done, you got to leave. Paul says, I'm a doulos because I owe a debt that I can't pay. Peter says, I'm a doulos because I have a debt to Yeshua the Messiah that I can't pay. Nobody can pay. You are a disaster in your humanity. Oh, why do you say that? I go to work every day. I take care of my kids. I've never killed anybody. Right? That's what people always answer. I've never killed anybody. Joe over there is way worse than I am. But he saves you. Paul keeps repeating, we've been redeemed by his blood. He says, I can't pay. I have a debt I can't repay, so I'm a doulos. I'll do whatever he wants me to do. In the Old Testament, there was a great Hebrew word, hineni. That means, here I am, Lord, what do you want me to do? I'm available for whatever you need. Abraham said it, Moses said it, Isaiah said it. Hineni, here I am, what do you want me to do? Isaiah saw the holiness of God in the temple, Isaiah chapter 6, saw the seraphim flying back and forth, saying, holy, holy, holy. And he says, I'm an unclean person, and I live with unclean people, and I've seen this. So God says, and I'm paraphrasing, I need some stuff done, who should we send? Who's going to go for us, plural? And Isaiah says, hineni, send me, here I am. So Paul is a doulos. So he says, woe to me if I don't preach the gospel. Because this is what I do. This is what we do. Every Christian should be preaching the gospel. I don't feel like it today. Well, Paul was beaten with rods, stoned, left for dead, attacked, shipwrecked. Some days he didn't feel like it either. But he kept doing it. And he didn't boast about it because he had nothing to boast about. Whoever preaches the gospel, whether it's Billy Graham or whether it's Joe Smith over there, has nothing to boast about. It's not about them. Paul wants to see people be saved. This has been laid on him, he says. It's been laid on me. And it's been laid on us. Oh, but you don't understand. My coworkers already think I'm crazy. My next door neighbor thinks I'm a kook. I'm not going to say anything. For if I do this willingly, I have a reward. But if against my will, I have been entrusted with a stewardship. What is my reward then? That when I preach the gospel, I may present the gospel of Christ without charge, that I may not abuse my authority in the gospel. I'm here to preach the gospel. If somebody gives me some money, fine. If they don't, that's fine. I can't remember where it is now, where he talks about, I know what it's like to have food and go hungry. I know what it's like to be cold. I know what it's like to be warm. I know what it's like to be comfortable. I know what it's like to not be comfortable. But hey, you know what? I just keep going. Oh, I don't know. You know, my back hurts today. And I'm going to just stay home for today. Oh, shut up, you big wuss. So he's permitted to be compensated. You know, when I get to this, because my feeling is any pastor, any priest, any messianic rabbi, and you've heard me say this, should have a job, even if it's part-time. Because they should earn at least some of their support. Paul said, hey, I preach the gospel for free. You don't have to pay me. I support myself. I'm not a burden to anyone. If I were married, you'd have to support my wife too. But I don't take anything. So he made tents in Corinth for 18 months. And so there's liberty in this, but he says the reward is going to be we're doing what he wants us to do. It's not a drudgery. It's not, I'm not coming to preach there unless somebody gives me this much money. I'm not coming to do this unless somebody pays me. Like we were talking about before with the doctor bills and stuff. You know, my office, I would just say, hey, there's going to be no charge. We just got to get you better. Oh, but wait a minute. Is it about the money or is it about the person? Is Paul going to preach the gospel or is he going to say, well, for 100 drachmas, I'll spend the evening there. If you want me to spend the whole weekend, it's going to be 500 drachmas, plus airfare, plus meals. Because he didn't have a private jet. Oh, come on, this is a tough crowd. So it's not a drudgery, it's a stewardship. You know, if you die today, right now, right this minute, and it doesn't matter, I never know what city we're in over there, whether it's Brooklyn Heights or Parma or Cleveland, but whatever paramedics come and they try to resuscitate you and you die, you know, Jesus is you're going to be standing in front of, and what do you want him to say? Well done, good and faithful servant. People who do the ministry, who do the work, who go into the places, who present him to say, I'm a servant, I'm a doulos, I want to tell you about the Messiah. I want to tell you about salvation. You don't want him to say, I had some stuff for you to do, and you didn't even do 10% of it. Oh, yeah. You went to church every Sunday. Yeah, that's great. That's wonderful. But there was more than that. You have a candle at your house? Great. But I had stuff for you to do. You don't want to hear that. But we'll be called to give an account. So what's the reward? Salvation for people who hear it. Winning souls. Not as your salary, not as your way you make a living. If you make a living, that's fine. But that shouldn't be the basis of it. He says, my reward is people are going to be saved. I've become all things to all people in order to save some. Right? He says, to the Jew, I became a Jew. To the Greek, I became a Greek. I may become all things to all people in order to save some. So he says, this is my reward. For though I am free from all men, I have made myself a servant to all, that I may win the more. You know, when we were doing our missions in Mexico City, we always did foot washings at every garbage dump we went to. And all these kids had just horrible, dirty, disgusting feet, and we'd wash their feet in soapy water and give them new socks and new shoes. And the adults would be like, wow, you know, why? Wow, this is great. Why are you doing that? Well, because Jesus loves you. We love you. Jesus loves you. We want to tell you about Jesus. You can have the shoes and socks even if you don't want to listen, but we want to tell you about them. So, you know, he was a Pharisee. He was a citizen. He was free in Yeshua, but he says, I become a servant to everyone. As long as they'll listen to me. I'll do whatever I have to do to be listened to. He was in prison in Rome, he says. He impacted people in Caesar's household. I can't remember where that is offhand, but he's in the Roman prison. And he's evangelizing people as they walk by, soldiers who come by. He impacted people in Caesar's household. The Caesar at the time was Nero, who was going to kill him, beheaded him in a short amount of time. But he goes, I'm a servant to gain more. So I become a servant because, oh, this got a little messed up, because it's not about me and it's not about us. Not about us. It's not about our comfort. It's not about our finances. It's not about whatever. Preaching the gospel is not about us, because we should be doulos. I don't know what the plural in Greek is, because I don't know Greek, but maybe Bill does. I don't know. But I don't know what the plural of, it's probably not douloses. But we all need to be douloses, or doulosai, or something. Because we all are bond servants. And so that should be the mission. And to the Jews, I became as a Jew, that I might win Jews. To those who are under the law, as under the law, that I might win those who are under the law. To those who are without law, as without law, but not being without law toward God, but under law toward Christ, that I might win those who are without law. To the weak, I became as weak, that I might win the weak. So he submitted to others that they can listen to him and be won over. Now, we work with lots of Jewish believers in Israel, and one thing they'll tell you, they're much looser than the Jewish believers in the States are. Some of them follow the dietary laws, some don't. But what they'll tell you, if you're the pastor of the congregation, he'll say, I follow the dietary laws. And do you know why? Why? Well, because if I'm talking to somebody, a Jew who's under the law, the first question will be, okay, so you have this, you know, they don't call him Yeshua, they won't say his name. So you have this Messiah, this guy you think is the Messiah. Do you eat pork? And if you say yes, end of the conversation. But if you say, oh, no, I follow the dietary laws, then they'll listen a little bit longer. You know, to us it sounds silly, but it's true. So they might listen, they might be won over. To Gentiles. So he uses an approach that they can understand. The Gentiles didn't have the law. The Gentiles were non-covenant, no law, outcast, dogs. This is why Yeshua calls the Syrophoenician woman a dog, refers to her as, you know, I come for the children of Israel, and it's not right to throw the food to the dogs, because the Jews called Gentiles dogs, because they were dirty and they were disgusting. They didn't like dogs. Middle Easterners in general don't like dogs. They looked at dogs as being scavengers and dirty, and if they saw our society, they would never believe it. But anyway, so it was an approach they could understand. And he took stumbling blocks away. You know, in Corinthians, he talks a lot about don't put stumbling blocks in front of people. You know, if you're witnessing to a Jewish friend and you say, you know, meet me at, I don't know, Canaries for breakfast, and you order the ham and eggs or the bacon and whatever, that becomes the issue then, because the guy sits there looking at the bacon going, and that becomes a stumbling block. So take stumbling blocks away. I have become all things to all men that I might by all means save some. Now this I do for the gospel's sake, that I may be partaker of it with you. Why does he want, he's a high-placed Pharisee. When he walked down the street, when a Pharisee walked down the street, I don't know if you've been watching The Chosen, but you see everybody goes like this. Because they were the holy guys. They wore all the cool stuff. It would be if you're in Rome and a whole group of cardinals and the Pope walk by, you'd be like, wow, it's the Pope and all the cardinals. Wow. That's what the Pharisees were. They wore all the cool stuff. When they got invited somewhere, they got the best seats. They stood on the corner and said the really long prayers. Jesus goes through this. Like, read Matthew 23 for your homework too, and you'll know. They eat up widows' money by saying really long prayers. Oh, by the way, that long prayer I just said, that's 14 shekels. You should have told me you wanted a shorter one. Like the guys on TV, you send $100, we'll pray for your request. You send 200, we'll pray twice as hard. Send 1,000, we'll take it home with us and pray. So for the sake of the gospel, for the cause of salvation, he'll humble himself. In Acts, he went back to the temple, had his head shaved. So people there would say, wow, this guy's really serious about what he's doing. He went to Jerusalem for the feasts, for the pilgrimage feasts. So that people there would say, wow, this guy believes in this craziness, but here he is doing the pilgrimage feast. Yes, because that was a way he could communicate with people. I don't know how much any of you guys interact with Jewish believers, but when a Jewish believer shows up for the feast, the traditional Jews look at him like, what are you doing here? He says, I'm here for the feast. Not that they have to, but you know what I mean. It's a good witnessing tool. It is for the cause of salvation. And this is one of my favorites, 2 Corinthians 11. From the Jews, 5 times I received 40 stripes, minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I have been in the deep, in journeys often, in perils of water. Jews hate water. Did you ever hear Jews sailing anywhere? They hate water. You know why? Because they thought on the other side of this water are Gentiles. When they say the coastlands, the islands, that means Gentiles. When Isaiah says, prophesies, I love Isaiah. Let's do Isaiah when we're done with Acts. When Isaiah prophesies, he's talking about Messiah, but he doesn't realize he's talking about Messiah. You know how that is in the Old Testament. He says the coastlands will wait for his teaching. That means the Gentiles are going to hear the teaching about the Jewish Messiah, and they're going to come to faith. They're going to come to salvation. They're going to come into the kingdom. They're going to forget about their 158 gods that are meaningless. They're going to forget about their stupid wooden and stone things that they have all over the place. They're going to come to faith in the Jewish Messiah. The coastlands are waiting for the teaching. They didn't know they were waiting for the teaching. But Isaiah prophesies it 700 and some years before it happens. Whew, that gets me pretty excited. In perils of the water, in perils of robbers, in perils of my own countrymen, in perils of the Gentiles, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, in weariness and toil, in sleeplessness often, in hunger and thirst, in fasting often, in cold and nakedness. This has been my life since that day that Ananias came to Damascus and the scales fell off my eyes. Why do I put up with this? Because I'm a doulos. Why do I put up with this? I want to see people saved. It isn't about me. I'm not the Pharisee anymore. When I was a Pharisee, I was a self-righteous, independent, arrogant person. Now I'm a servant to everybody. So all these things happen, but I keep going. Was he discouraged sometimes? Yes. He doesn't write a lot about his discouragement, a little bit here and there, but can you imagine? You know, in Acts, they beat him and stoned him, and they throw him and Silas out of the city, and I think it was Lystra, and they thought he was dead. They came to, and he says, okay, let's get back in there. Which corner were we on? Was he discouraged? Yes. Was he sometimes overwhelmed? Yes. Does it encourage you when your family members think you're crazy and when your friends think you're crazy? When people look at you and say, I can't believe you believe that. That's so stupid. Is that encouraging? No. I'll never forget this young woman who was a drug rep. And it was right around Christmas time, just before I retired, and I started witnessing to her and evangelizing, because I always used Christmas as, to counter what I call Christmas cookie religion. So she listened to the whole spiel, and she said, and she left. So I was going about my business. She came back and said, I want to tell you something. This is like a 25-year-old young woman. And she goes, you're the most arrogant man I've ever met. And I said, why do you say that? She said, because you think you're the only one that's right. I said, no, I don't think I'm the only one who's right. But I think Jesus is the only way to salvation. I think Jesus is the only way you can have your sins forgiven. I think Jesus is the only way you can go into heaven. Has nothing to do with me. Or like some of my relatives say to me, so what's it to you if two men want to get married? I say, what's it to me? Our opinion on law is truth, little t. Doesn't matter, because there's truth with a capital T. So was he overwhelmed? Yes. Jeremiah, chapter 20. I love Jeremiah, the wailing prophet. They hated his guts. Jeremiah, we want to hear something positive. You're nothing but a party pooper. Nothing's going to happen to us. We got the temple over here. We're the priests. We got all the stuff here. God's not going to destroy his own house. Dude, you got to get with it. And the false prophets came in and said, you listen to that guy? You ever watched any of his YouTubes? It's all gloom and doom. God doesn't know what he's talking about. He's just a malcontent. So in chapter 20, he says, I'm in derision all the time. I'm mocked. I'm ridiculed. I'm condemned. They threw him in the cistern, hoping he would just die, just like Joseph. Ridiculed, mocking. The priests mocked him. There were no Pharisees yet. The priests mocked him. The false prophets mocked him. They ridiculed him in the streets because he said, destruction is coming from the north and all this is going to be down. That's a good one. We got our own church going over here. You belong to some weird church. And destruction came from the north and everything was torn down. But he says he's mocked, ridiculed, and condemned. Then in verse 9 he says, here's his frustration. And all of us have felt this way. Then I said, I will not make mention of him, nor speak any more in his name. But his word was in my heart like a burning fire, shut up in my bones. I was weary of holding it back, and I could not. Today, I'm not going to talk about God. I'm not going to talk about his word. In this case, I'm not going to talk about his law. I'm not even going to mention his name. I'm not going to witness to anybody. If anybody at Panero's asks me a question, I'm going to say, I don't know. I just want to be left alone for a while. I've had it with the ridicule. But then, it starts burning inside of me like a fire. And if I don't let it out, my bones are going to break. So I have to preach. Paul was just like this. 2 Timothy 4. If y'all are interested in the 2 Timothy class, I can give you a link. This is verse 7. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. All that stuff happened to me, but you know what? I fought. I ran. I kept the faith. Everybody hates me, but you know what? I fought the race. I fought the fight. I ran the race. I kept the faith. My parents disowned me. Well, I fought the fight. I ran the race. You know, you're a young person. You're from a strict Jewish family, or even a non-strict Jewish family. You come to faith in Yeshua. Your parents, for the most part, not only disown you, but they have a funeral for you. You're dead to us now. People say there's nothing more important than family. Well, talk to some of these guys about it. Their parents tell them they're dead. They have a funeral service at the synagogue. They try to deprogram them with these people that deprogram cult people. Rabbi Schneider got locked in his room as an 18-year-old. And some deprogrammer came every day for a couple of weeks. And the guy said to the parents, I'm not making any progress. And he came out and said, I don't care what else you do to me. I'm a believer in Yeshua. He's my Lord and Savior. And if you want to disown me, that's fine. Because now I know the truth. These young Jews for Jesus people, they get on buses, they go all over the world, any city in the world that has more than 25,000 Jews, and they go through the streets passing out tracts. Their families have disowned them. They raise their own support. They say, but now we know the truth. So he preaches the gospel not because he's going to get something out of it, not because it's going to make him look good. It's because he lowers himself in order to reach people. And if you don't reach people for Jesus, you know, the culture is always evangelizing. I mean, we're pretty much an older crowd here. I mean, you see how the culture evangelizes your grandchildren. Watch TV, watch the movies, go online. Culture's always evangelizing. And they're never going to stop. And we sit, you know, and like our friend Ralph Martin says, if you don't believe there's spiritual warfare going on around you, you're already a casualty. Ephesians 6 with the armor. You know, Paul says you stand. You put on the armor of God and you stand. And you have the sword, which is the word. You don't let your guard down. The arrows keep coming from all directions. The culture is always evangelizing. We have to make a stand for the gospel. Woo. So, just a little, can't remember what Rush Limbaugh used to call it, advertising, but I can't remember the word he used. So 3 websites, but I really want to start getting Roots and Foundation a little more play. 2 podcasts. I decided to write the address out because it's a pain to search for them. I can't even find it when I search for them. And the YouTube, of course, most of you are familiar with. But in Roots and Foundation, there's going to be a whole series of Bible courses. There's 6 on there now. That's been, you know, going since last fall, but there'll be more coming. And if you go on it and you say, oh, I'd like to take this class on Philippians, there's a thing there that'll tell you to email me and I'll send you a link. It's only $10,000 a class. And I even put the Torah class on the thing to give people yet another place where they can watch the Torah class without having to search for it on YouTube. And I should call it the Tony Vignali Memorial Torah class. And there's a bunch of audio teachings. And then starting September 1st, I'll be teaching another class at Basora Institute. That's supposed to be institute, not institutor. But Basora is the Hebrew word for good news. Basora Institute is local here. It's located in Twinsburg. It's all online. Somebody once said they took a class online from Basora Institute. They wanted to come and visit because they wanted to see the campus. And I said, well, if they let us in their house, okay. But the campus is basically their house. Ron and Esther are very involved with Basora Institute. And they do classes, they do seminars, they do conferences. They do a lot of biblical archaeology classes. They do this sort of, Hebrew roots, one new man kind of stuff that we do here. And if you go on their website, and again, that's institute, not institutor, and there's a tab called courses, and then you can see all the stuff that they're offering. But starting September 1st, I'm doing a class called Yeshua in the Book of Hebrews. And it's going to be 6 weeks long. It's going to be on Sundays at 4 p.m. And it's basically going to be, and you guys already know this, but it's basically going to be how the writer to the Hebrews shows how Torah is fulfilled in the Messiah and everything that Yeshua did, and how he's the eternal high priest. He's the sacrifice. He's the mediator. All the aspects of the high priest, of course, are in him. So there is a charge for that, but I don't get the money. So, so go to Basora Institute and see about it. So let's close.